He stood next to that truck and looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been telling himself not yet about for 20 years. 2 weeks into retirement, leather interior, crew cab, the whole thing. And I watched him and I recognized the look because I had seen it before in someone I know well, and I had watched what came next. There are things that happen in the first months of retirement that nobody lays out for you honestly. The budget that turns out to be a different shape than you expected. The purchase that felt like the finish line and turned out to be something else. The moment a man's daughter says something to him he is not ready to hear. There are at least 4 things I have watched happen to people I know. People who were practical their whole careers, who walked into retirement and made the same mistake at the same moment for the same reason, and not one of them saw it coming. I'm going to tell you about all of it. I'm Mike, and I'm grateful you're here for this one. This channel is a community of people trying to get this transition right, and the conversations in the comments are the most honest ones I have. Subscribe and be part of them. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming. Before we get into the video, tell me in the comments, how many years have you been retired, or how many months until you leave work? I want to know who's in the room. Now, keep an open mind for what comes next, because some of it is going to land differently than you expect. Phil's neighbor drove home in a new F-150 about 6 weeks into retirement. Phil's neighbor drove home in a new F-150 about 6 weeks into retirement. Crew cab, leather interior, the full package. I was standing in the driveway when he pulled in. Phil was next to me. We both watched him park it, watched him get out and look back at it the way you look at something you've been thinking about for a long time. Phil didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We stood there for a few seconds, and then Phil said he needed to go check on something inside. That silence said everything. I've been thinking about that truck ever since. Not because there's anything wrong with the new truck. There isn't. I drove a 12-year-old Silverado to that plant for 36 years, and I never once felt like I was missing something. The truck got me there. It got me home. That's what trucks are for. But something about watching Phil's neighbor park that thing 6 weeks into retirement with that specific look on his face, the look of a man who had finally done something for himself after a very long time of doing things for other people. Something about that stayed with me in a way I've been trying to figure out how to say out loud. Because I knew that look. I recognized it. And I recognized something else underneath it that he probably wasn't thinking about yet. Something that wouldn't show up until month 3, maybe month 4, when the feeling of the reward started to fade and the payment was still there. This video is about that, about the new car before retirement, about what it actually is and what it actually costs. Not in the way a financial planner would tell you, because I'm not one of those, but in the way a man who has watched this happen up close would tell you, in the way Phil would tell you if Phil talked more, which he mostly doesn't. So let me ask you something. How many of you have had that thought? The one that goes, I have been practical my whole life. I drove sensible vehicles because I was responsible. I bought used because it made sense. I deferred the thing I wanted because there was always a better reason to wait. And now I'm standing at the edge of something I've been building toward for 3 decades, and I am finally allowed to stop deferring. How many of you have felt that? How many of you are feeling it right now? Because that feeling is real. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else. The feeling is real, and it is earned, and it makes complete sense. 36 years on a plant floor, 30 years running a job site, 28 years driving a school bus. Whatever your version of it was, you did the work. You showed up. You were the one they called when something went wrong. You were the one who stayed late and skipped a vacation and told yourself, not yet, not now, there's still more to do. That is real. That counts. Nobody is arguing with any of it. What I'm asking is whether the truck is actually the proof of it, whether the car is the thing that makes it real, whether what you're buying when you walk into that dealership in the first 2 months of retirement is actually what you think you're buying. Because in my experience, and in the experience of someone I know well, someone who learned this the harder way, what you're buying is more complicated than a vehicle, and the cost is more complicated than the payment. Here's what I didn't understand until someone I trust laid it out for me plainly. The first 2 years of retirement are the most financially disorienting years of retirement. Not because of the market, not because of inflation or interest rates or any of that, because of you. Because you don't know yet what this life actually costs. You've been running a budget for decades around a salary, and now you're running it around something else. Social Security, maybe a pension, maybe savings you're drawing on. And the relationship between income and expense feels different at a molecular level, even if the numbers look similar on paper. Things you thought would shrink don't shrink. Things you didn't budget for appear. The house that was fine when you were gone 10 hours a day starts showing you, when you're home all day, what it actually needs. I spent more money in month 2 of my retirement than I had in any single month of the last 5 years of working. Not on anything dramatic, not on anything I planned, just on being home and noticing things. A gutter, a water heater that had been making a sound I'd been meaning to get to. A week where Karen and I ate out more than usual because neither of us had figured out yet what the days were supposed to look like. Small things. But the point is, I didn't know what retirement cost until I was in it. And I walked in thinking I had a pretty good idea. Add a car payment to a budget you don't fully understand yet, and you've anchored something fixed to something that's still finding its shape. That's what I didn't see coming. That's what Phil's neighbor is going to figure out in about 4 months. And I hope he does it with less difficulty than the man I want to tell you about now. My cousin Dennis retired from the railroad after 34 years. Track maintenance supervisor. Spent his career out in weather, working with crews, making sure that infrastructure held. He was good at it the same way I was good at what I did. Not because it came easily, but because he gave it everything, consistently, for a very long time. He is the most practically minded man I know in most areas of his life. He drives sensible vehicles. He buys tools when he needs them and not before. He fixed his own roof 2 summers ago at 61 years old because he looked at what the contractor quoted and said that seemed like a project he could handle. 2 weeks after his last day on the railroad, Dennis put $42,000 into a new pickup truck. Leather interior, crew cab, towing package. He didn't have anything specific to tow. It was the truck he'd been thinking about for 20 years. He knew exactly which one he wanted. He'd been watching them, pricing them, telling himself someday, for longer than some of his younger crew members had been alive. And the week he retired, someday arrived. I'm not going to tell you the truck wasn't beautiful. It was. I saw it the first time that spring, and I understood immediately why he'd wanted it. I also understood, looking at Dennis standing next to it, that the truck wasn't really about the truck. It was about the 20 years of telling himself not yet. It was about crossing something. It was about standing outside a vehicle that nobody had issued to him, that nobody could repossess because of a job change, that was entirely and completely his. Proof that the 34 years had produced something he was allowed to keep. I get that. I genuinely get that. And I still couldn't shake the thing I was thinking, which was, Dennis doesn't know yet what retirement costs. He's been in it for 2 weeks. He is buying a $42,000 answer to a question he hasn't fully asked yet. By fall of that year, he called Phil. Not me. He didn't know me as well then. But Phil, who had been retired for a few years already and who Dennis knew from family events. He called Phil on a Sunday afternoon, and he didn't call to complain, which is worth noting because Dennis is not a man who complains. He called to ask a question. He said, how do you adjust your thinking about spending when the thing you're adjusting feels like it was already earned? How do you look at something you waited 20 years for and tell yourself you're looking at a problem? Phil didn't have a clean answer. Phil told me about it later and said he just listened, mostly. Because the honest answer was, you can't, not easily, and maybe not fully. You made the decision, and now the decision is made and you live with it. What you can do is make different decisions about what comes next. The boat you were thinking about, the renovation you'd been sketching out, those can wait. Those can wait until you know the terrain better. Dennis waited on the boat. He waited on the renovation. And what that year of waiting taught him, the harder, leaner year than he'd expected, was something he told me about 18 months later. He said he understood now what he'd actually been buying. He said the truck was proof that the years were real, that the sacrifice counted, that he'd made it to the other side of something long and difficult and had something specific and physical in his to show for it. And the truck was a fine truck. He wasn't wrong to want it. He just hadn't understood that the proof he was looking for wasn't something you could buy. It was something you earned by living in retirement long enough to know what it actually was. That distinction took him 18 months and $42,000 to figure out. He told his brother-in-law the same thing when the brother-in-law retired 8 months later. The brother-in-law nodded and bought a boat 2 weeks in. He has his own clarity now. That seems to be how it works. Here's the other thing that took me a while to understand. And this one is harder to say because it touches something that men in the trades don't usually talk about directly. The spring after my first full year of retirement, my son Jason came over on a Saturday to help with the Mustang. I say help. Mostly he handed me things and we talked. He's not a car guy, Jason. He's an accountant. But he shows up when I'm working on something and he's good company while he's doing it. Always has been. That day we were in the garage for about 2 hours, just the two of us. No phone calls, no agenda, nothing overriding it. At the end, when he was getting ready to leave, I watched him back out of the driveway and I stood there in the garage with that specific feeling you get when something was good and you're just now noticing it was good. And I thought, that was the first time. The first time in his adult life that I had 2 unscheduled hours on a Saturday with my son and nothing competing for them. 30 years of Saturdays, good Saturdays, plenty of them, but always with something in the background, a call I might need to take, a thing at the plant I was still half thinking about, the general low-grade weight of being someone who was always on call, even when he wasn't officially on call. 30 years of that. And then one Saturday morning in my garage, 2 hours that belonged entirely to nothing except the car and my son talking next to me while I worked. That's what retirement is supposed to buy you. Not just the Mustang, the uninterrupted morning. Now here's the thing about a car payment. A car payment doesn't feel like it costs you time with your kids. That's not how it shows up. It doesn't arrive as a Wednesday morning when Jason calls and you have to say you can't make it because of a bill. It's quieter than that. It's the low-grade budget pressure that sits on every decision. The fishing trip that gets pushed to next year because this year is a little tighter than expected. The visit you say yes to and then find yourself quietly calculating whether you should have. The renovation at Jason's place that you could have helped with, financially, but this year the numbers are closer than you thought they'd be. It doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. Dennis's daughter told him something about a year into his retirement that he repeated to me and I've thought about ever since. She said, "Dad, I don't need the truck. I need the version of you that has time." And Dennis didn't know what to say to that because the truck and the time felt to him like the same thing. The truck was what the time had produced. The truck was the reward of the years that the time cost him. How could she not need the truck? But she wasn't talking about the truck. She was talking about the version of her father who had nothing competing for his Saturday morning. The version who could sit in the backyard with her for 2 hours without half his brain somewhere else. The version who had crossed over from essential to the system to essential to the people. That version doesn't cost $42,000. That version is just what retirement makes possible if you don't add enough fixed weight to it to make the freedom feel smaller than it should. I want to stop here for a moment because I want to say this as plainly as I know how. You weren't buying a truck. You were buying proof. That's what I believe is happening when a man who has been practical his entire career walks into a dealership in the first month of retirement and signs something that surprises even him. He is not buying a vehicle. He is buying evidence that the years were real, that the sacrifice counted, that he is allowed to stop deferring and start receiving. And those things are all true. The years were real. The sacrifice counted. He is allowed. He is more than allowed. But the proof he is looking for, the actual proof, the kind that settles something inside you, that is not in the truck. That is not something a transaction can produce. The proof comes from living in retirement long enough to discover what it actually is. And you can't rush that. You can't buy it early. That is what Dennis figured out. Not that the truck was wrong. The truck was a good truck. The proof was wrong. He was trying to buy a feeling of arrival before he had actually arrived. An arrival in retirement is not a moment. It is not the day you sign the buyout or drive off the lot or pour the first cup of coffee that doesn't need to be finished by a certain time. Arrival is something that happens quietly, over months, as you figure out what this life actually is when it belongs entirely to you. I want you to sit with that for a second. The truck just wasn't the proof you needed. Think about what you were actually looking for when you started thinking about that purchase. Not the leather interior or the towing capacity, what you were looking for underneath it. The feeling of having crossed something. The feeling of finally doing something entirely for yourself after a very long time of doing things for the job, the family, the mortgage, the plan. That feeling is real and it is yours and it is not wrong to want it. But it doesn't live in a vehicle. It lives in the first Saturday morning that belongs entirely to you. It lives in the 2 uninterrupted hours with your son in the garage. It lives in the moment, and it comes, I promise you it comes, when you stop waiting for the phone to ring from the plant and realize you stopped waiting sometime last Tuesday and didn't notice. That's the arrival. That's the proof. And it's free. I am not telling you not to buy a car. I am not telling you what to do with your money. That is genuinely not my lane, and I mean that. What I'm saying is this. The first 2 years of retirement will show you things about what your life costs and who you are outside the job that you cannot know in advance. You can make projections and they will be wrong in interesting ways. You can have a plan and it will hold mostly and fail in specific places you did not anticipate. That is not a problem. That is retirement. That is what it feels like to be learning a new system while you are living inside it. What I'm saying is, don't add a major fixed commitment to a budget that is still introducing itself to you. Don't buy the proof before you've earned the knowledge of what you actually need to prove. Give yourself 60 days in retirement before you make a large purchase you've been deferring. Just 60 days. Let retirement show you what it costs. Let it show you what you are when there is no line to keep running. And then, when you buy the truck, if you buy the truck, you'll know what you're buying. Not the proof that the years were real. Just a truck, which is, in the end, a much better reason to buy one. Dennis still has the truck. It's paid off now, and he drives it the way a man drives a truck he has made peace with, without the weight of what it was supposed to mean, which makes it considerably lighter. He told me last summer he'd probably buy the same truck again. Just 3 months later in the retirement. 3 months would have told him a lot. If you're standing somewhere between your last day of work and a dealership, I'm not here to stop you. But I want to ask you to do one thing first. Sit with the budget for 60 days. Let retirement show you its actual shape before you add something fixed to it. That's not financial advice. That's just what Dennis would tell you if you called him on a Sunday afternoon the way he called Phil. And he would tell you from the front seat of a truck he is genuinely glad to own, which just goes to show that the story doesn't have a villain. It just has a timing problem that nobody warned him about. I'm glad he told me. I'm glad I'm telling you. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you write it in the comments. If you bought something big right before or right after you retired, a car, a truck, a boat, a renovation, anything, I want to know what it was actually for. Not what you told your spouse it was for. Not what you told yourself at the dealership. What it was actually for. What you were trying to prove or feel or settle. Write it down there. I read every one of them. And I suspect you'll find, looking at the comments, that you're not the only one who was buying something other than what was on the receipt. If what you heard today felt true to something you've been carrying around, I'd be glad if you'd subscribe. Not because the numbers mean anything to me, because the conversations that happen in the comments below these videos have become some of the most honest ones I get to be part of, and I'd like you to be part of them. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one when it comes. I'm going to go back to the Mustang now. It's been sitting there all morning, 90% done, which my son Jason will tell you it has been for 2 years. He's not wrong. But I'm not in a hurry. That's new. And that, more than anything else I could buy, is the proof I was looking for.